In the past, even defining highly effective teaching has been problematic. Going right back to the guru Peter Drucker and his notion that it's virtually undefinable, or has been, to now an evidence-based approach which can now start to frame good teaching from a more scientific point of view. So where do we go with creative teaching? I've often been asked, well, what's the difference between creative teaching and highly effective teaching? Well, firstly, let's start with a definition, and it's my own one. And creative teaching occurs when a teacher combines existing knowledge in some novel form to get valuable results in terms of facilitating student learning and attainment. I don't normally read the thing out, but there's some key things here. When we say existing knowledge, this is our knowledge about teaching, learning, students, everything we know about our subject matter. But when we put it together in an instructional strategy in some novel way, that's not just pure textbook, and it gets valuable results. And what does that mean? Valuable results mean that the learning process has been positively effective. In other words, you get attention, you illustrate the concept, it creates variation in the learning experience, it provides an interesting feedback source, it creates a bit of humour, enhances the psychological environment. That's what that means. Now, the next bit of the definition, plan before teaching, means that you can actually plan your lesson and build in some creative components. But sometimes when you're teaching, you'll know this as experienced professionals, that things may not be going as well, and you kind of dig into your stock of professional knowledge and you say, well, okay, I'll try this or I'll change this. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. When it works, it's probably creative. In many ways, the underpinning process is similar to what Edward de Bono talks about in terms of lateral thinking, looking at things from a completely different vantage point. And what about creative teachers? How will we frame them? Well, obviously, they're going to be highly effective, but the terms used by Atano and Inagaki of routine and adaptive experts is an interesting one, because when they studied expertise, they found that people can be very expert, but some are routine experts. In other words, they're good at solving very familiar problems, but lack that creative aspect to come up with new ideas and implement those in challenging and novel situations. So creative teachers are adaptive experts in teaching. Let's illustrate this in the next slide or two. Well, once I was watching a academic faculty teaching Newton's second law of motion. Now, I won't read this out, it will send you to sleep, so you can do that yourself and then wake up and move on. But to read that definition out, particularly if it's in a fairly dull voice, and then follow it up with a lot of chat and equations, is not a great primacy effect, and it's likely to be demotivating. And I remember talking to the lecturer, and he said, well, how else might you do it? Okay, here's a creative frame. You may or may not like it. Okay, go in and show a picture of David Beckham kicking a football. Typical free kick situation. Now, you've got to remember this was several years ago when David Beckham, maybe more than several years ago, when David Beckham was playing for Manchester United. When you show this to a group of students, it's likely to get a bit of a von Westhoff effect, that the boys like football and might start talking about football. And David Beckham, I would reluctantly concede, is a pretty good looking guy, so he might get the attention of some of the girls as well. But now, here's the catch. Present the photo, then pose a question such as, what would happen if certain conditions were changed? Opposition played a trick on David, put down the heavy ball. Would that ball go faster or slower? Could also say, well, David plays a trick on the opposition. He's been doing extra training, he can now kick it harder by 10%. Now, again, how would this affect how fast the ball went? Now, essentially, by having that dialogue and getting the students thinking, it will come up with that definition. A bit more interesting way to do it, perhaps. One can then start to relate it to the world of engineering and real world stuff. Okay, so there's an example. Now that was creative planning. I thought about that prior to the lesson. However, once, and this happened in Singapore, I was teaching a module, one of these electives, and I went into the classroom. It was one of those afternoons. I could see the students were only there because they had to be there. It was what was called a GEMS module. And I thought, well, rather than just start, I remembered working in Kolkata, and I'll keep this brief. And one morning, a young boy, probably about 12, 13, asked me if I could give him a job, and that was kind of interesting. He didn't actually ask for money, and he went on to say he didn't want to end up being a street kid and stealing and all that kind of stuff. He was looking for a job so he can learn some skills and get a job. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to give him a job, but the story stuck in my mind. It was an experience, and I then told the Kolkata story to the students here at SB, and I said, you know, in a fairly firm, expressive voice, what's the difference between that kid and you? And it got them thinking, and obviously they've come up with the basic fact that they've got opportunity. So I said to them, well, pay attention in class then, and they kind of did. And what was interesting, when I went in the following week, those students said, oh, it's okay, Cho, you don't need to tell us a Kolkata story again, we get it. And it seemed like that kind of broke down some barrier and anchored it into the fact that, well, they're in class, so get something out of it, because it's a bit of a privilege, really. So that's an example of situated invention, a bit of creativity in situ. It worked, so it could be called creative teaching. Okay, so here's a final frame. If I put it all together, it should look fairly familiar. Take your time, but pedagogic literacy, bottom of the pyramid, is what we know about learning, what we know about effective methods, and the ability to put that together and apply it quite well, we can say that that's competent teaching. And where does that become creative teaching? Well, that's the ability to create those really good Russian dolls and do the kinds of things where we can utilize our resources in novel ways and useful ways to get positive student responses. So it's a conceptual model, not hierarchical. In fact, people can move up and down this. Ultimately, if you're a really highly adaptive expert, what I would say to have a high level of creative teaching competence, notice that on the end, once you're really at that level, then you're the Roger Federer or the Serena Williams of teaching. So it's a challenging thing, but that's how it works. And as teachers, the extent to which we can perhaps move up that pyramid is mark of our professional expertise. I hope that makes sense.